has an ambitious climate action strategy as well. It is called Transform TO. This strategy aims to achieve a low carbon, healthy, equitable, and resilient future for Toronto, and to align with the city's climate action strategy, in addition to all other capital projects that require significant funding. Always money, it's always a big challenge. And there are several mechanisms to finance these green projects. There are funding from province and federal governments, develop more revenue tools, and seek direct investment from the private sector. Also, we have to develop cost-effective financing programs to fund the city's building needs, such as Green Bond Program. And today I'm here to talk about how the City of Toronto accesses the capital markets through its Green Bond Program. We're going to talk about mainly 5 topics, just a quick overview of our debt issuance program. What are green bonds, type of green bonds, why we want to issue green bonds, and in general, the life cycle of issuing green bonds. So at the City of Toronto, we designed our issuance program to align with our corporate strategic plan in 5 key areas: affordable housing, transit, enhancing social outcomes, addressing climate change, and enhancing governance. And green, the climate part, it's pretty much embedded in every key areas. For example, in housing, we have a lot of energy retrofit projects, transit, for example, purchase of subway cars or any supporting infrastructure. We also have invest in people and neighborhoods such as green roofs. And in terms of building resilience, for example, in 2020, we funded a project that is the Portland's flood protection projects. And you have to understand what conventional, like, so our priority is to fund green projects and social projects. And then what we cannot issue as green or social bonds, we issue as conventional bonds. But what is conventional doesn't mean it is bad, it's brown. It's nothing about green benefits or social benefits. Sometimes it's simply because we don't have measurements, the metrics that is required in order to issue sustainable bonds such as green or social. So what are green bonds? The difference between green bonds versus conventional bonds is really the restriction on the use of proceeds to project with specific environmental benefits as outlined in the green bond framework. And as you can see, there are several eligibility criteria, typically along with the energy efficiency, renewable energy, transportation, green buildings, biodiversity, climate change adaptation, renewable energy. For example, in green buildings, in general, usually the accepted level is the Leadership Energy and Environmental Design Rating System, Gold or Platinum. And if there are any other standards, such as in Toronto, City of Toronto, we have our Toronto Green Standard, it's tier 2, 3, or 4. And the second opinion or other verifier of the framework would study what do you mean by in that standard and try to draw a parallel between that standard versus the LEED rating system. So regardless, it needs to be at least gold standard in the LEED rating system. The type of green bonds, the most typically used, the majority of green bonds are issued as the general use of proceeds. So at City of Toronto, it is basically a general obligation bond, meaning they're backed by the credit and taxing power of the city. The main difference, again, is the limitation on the use of the project, which is limited to meeting the eligibility criteria within the green bond framework. And then other type of green bonds, including the use of proceeds revenue bond, which is basically using the revenue stream such as tax and tolls as collateral. Green project bond or securitizing bond is basically the recourse is on the project. One is based on the project assets and balance sheets, and the other one is a group of projects. For example, in green project bonds, Alta Wind Holdings is backed by Alta Wind projects, whereas green securitized bond, an example would be Solar City, is backed by their residential solar leases. So why do we want to issue green bond? What's the benefits? There's a very, very robust demand, and the significant increase in ESG mandated investment funds, even if it's not a specific mandate that it has to be ESG, most of the investment fund these days would have some sort of ESG components added to the investment policy or embedded in the investment manager selection process. When we say that, mainly when an investment manager make decision, they have to demonstrate they have considered ESG in the criteria. Institutional investors basically believe that adding ESG criteria to a portfolio can enhance resiliency and possibly performance. And the portfolio represents a local starting point for the integration of ESG into the border organizations. And City of Toronto, we have issued an ESG report that shows our integration of ESG into basically everywhere within the city. And another benefit, when you have demand more than supply, cheaper cost because more demand. And in general, our financing cost for our green or social bond versus a non-green conventional bond, we have a saving of 1 to 3 basis points due to a higher net demand. What is a basis point is 0.01%. It sounds very small, but when you issue large volume, for example, City of Toronto, our annual debt issuance is close to $1 billion a year. And then that add up, and then it goes on every year, the interest cost. And the second benefit is diversity in investor base. So not just the traditional investors, also the green ESG mandated investor. The traditional investors still want to pay more for the green bonds because it's performed very well in the secondary market. While they might pay 1 to 3 basis point more at the primary market. In the secondary market, the resale in the secondary market could be 1 to 9 basis point. So it's a very good growth opportunity. And in the green investor, they are limited to buying bonds that shows green benefits. So, and then they have the restrictions. So it's actually increasing and diversifying the investor base. And the investors for green bonds tend to be high quality investors. What does that mean? They tend to buy and hold, and they are not flipper. So they don't buy and sell right away to get a quick profit. And also, one of the key objectives is to align our strategy with our funding source. And another point is strengthening stakeholder relationship. And because it costs higher engagement, they would ask questions, investors, they often come ask questions. And then we have to report to see how we actually spend the money. And that's also enhance accountability. So this is just a demonstration slides to show Canadian municipalities, how much we have issued so far, and also the provinces. The Canadian municipality, Toronto, Ottawa, and Vancouver, since 2018, have issued 1.3 billion of green bonds, and Ontario and Quebec issued about 11 billion of green bonds since 2014. One point to note is for municipality, according to the regulation, the maturity of the bond cannot exceed the remaining economic useful life of the capital assets. And also we can only issue for capital projects and not for operating. So as you can see, the City of Toronto, we have issued in mainly the 20 and 30 years infrastructure, mainly for infrastructure. So for the City of Toronto, in our past 3 issuance, we have totaled 630 million, and we have issued for a basket of projects, mainly in the area of sustainable clean transportation, renewable and efficiency energy, as well as climate change adaptation and resilience. City of Toronto, the green bonds mainly for the same projects has been on the light rail, the LRT projects. And City of Vancouver, let me just go back one slide so that I can see City of Vancouver, the 85 million in 2018 is also based on a basket of projects for green buildings, renewable energy, clean transportation, and wastewater management. So in our 2020, last year, when we did a debt issue in around November, we mainly did it for 3 projects, which is our social housing, the Toronto Community Housing multi-year retrofit, the Portland flood protection, and also the subway track, mainly for sustainable green transportation, energy efficiency, and resilience. And we use 20 years because these 3 projects has a minimum economic useful life of 20 years. Total we issue for 130 million. And we also have to tell the investor what type of key performance indicator, the metrics that we'll be able to report going forward. So I don't know, I was talking about the 3 projects, and we have to report KPI, and mainly investor wants to look at GHG emission. But when it comes to some other categories, such as resilience, to be a little bit different, we can look at such as urban land protected from floods, new river channel created, and biodiversity, we could look at a creation of aquatic habitat as well. And this is just an example for our 2020. I also want to show you an example from City of Vancouver, because I know you guys might be interested in green buildings. So
sorry, Betsy, just don't mean to interrupt, but we just want to be mindful of time. So just if you could wrap it up soon. So sorry for interrupting.
Oh, sure, no problem. This is just an example of City of Vancouver, the green buildings. So what they show is they show the LEED gold standard, and they have a passive house certified. And as every year they have to show their results. If you can look at the green area, where they show this 96% reduction and 100% reduction. And this is the last section, which is on the green bond issuance life cycle. I'm going very quickly. We have to review our funding source and then look at to put together a framework. The framework is based on green bond principle, 4 pillars: use of proceeds, selection process, management of proceeds, and ongoing reporting. Once you have that, get a verification, such as second party opinion. We got it from Sustainalytics. And then optional, whether you want to get a credit rating or not, issue the bond. And then the key is ongoing reporting on the compliance of the use of proceeds, and also metric reporting and any update on the projects. And as a closing slide, some of the challenges in this area: there's no global standard in regard to ESG reporting or green bonds issuance yet. There's some guidance, but not global standard. And there's a lot of concern about greenwashing, but a lot of policymakers as well as professional associations are coming up with new standard. And Europe is kind of ahead of us, and they're posting many rules. And usually I think Canada is going to follow suit as well. And as a closing comments, what lesson learned is when we put together a project, I think it's very key. If you wanted to go through the green bonds route, you have to make sure there are metrics and plan to measures. What are you going to measure? What are you going to report? I think that's very key, and that's what prohibit us from issuing more green bonds. Is some of the project does not have metrics metrics for reporting. And here's my contact information if you have any other questions.
Thanks so much, Betsy. That was really informative. Great to hear all these wonderful things happening in Toronto. Hopefully we can do some of that here in some of our cities. So now we're going to pass it over to Brian Scott, who's going to talk to us about PACE. Brian, when you have a moment, take it away. All right, you might be muted if you're trying to talk. Well, you are muted if you're trying to talk.
I am muted. Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
And can you see the right screen?
We absolutely can. You're
perfect. Okay. Hello, everybody. Well, thank you very much for having me present. This is a great opportunity. Normally, this takes about an hour, so jamming it into 10 minutes is going to be a rush. So I'm going to blast through stuff very quickly here. There's a lot of content. I'm assuming you're going to be able to go back to get the document later, so it'll be valuable for you at a later point in time. This is a fast and furious overview of PACE, if you will. And basically what I'm going to explain is how it works, what makes it successful, and how it can play a material role in helping Manitoba, Canada, and the world actually achieve its climate change targets and create a sustainable future. Just a quick status update, however, on where we're at in Canada. So, get my screen working properly here. There we go. So this illustrates our target achievement by 2020. This is from Government of Canada report that was published in 2020. And as you can see, the target that was set by Canada was 511 megatons by 2030. And we are far from that. And that's why adding another tool into the equation here is critical, and PACE financing. I'm an unabashed PACE fan, and I think PACE can help significantly with that. So what's PACE? Well, it's a financing tool, first and foremost. It's actually an acronym for Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's worth noting at this point that it's a word that's growing into an internationally recognized brand. As you can see, I just did a quick scan around the Google universe, and I came up with these in about 5 minutes. PACE is a critical piece in recognizing that brand. More importantly, though, PACE is an ecosystem. And the value of the ecosystem can't be understated. So we can't just have the tool, we actually have to have the whole ecosystem to make it work. More about the significance of the ecosystem later, but first of note is that the concept was developed in 2008. And by 2009, Scientific American had already named it a top 20 world-changing idea. Interesting, why was it recognized so quickly? Well, it was because it addressed this apparent dilemma. It eliminates that dynamic, the pull between the economy versus the planet. You know, can we afford this? Survival is more important, etc. So what's PACE? PACE is a financing tool which permits property owners to borrow money to install energy efficiency measures and renewable energy systems with no money down, and with the loan repaid through the property taxes over the expected life of the upgrade, thus effectively eliminating the conflict between sustainability and economics. PACE turns buildings from energy pigs into super performance buildings. PACE is attractive to property owners because it eliminates the two largest barriers that remain to performance upgrades, those being money, and the second one I'll get to in a second. Now, it's important to note here that even when they have the capital available, owners are often torn between competing capital demands. We heard a speaker earlier talking about or responding to a question with regards to upgrading a building to address thermal bridging, but there's a capital cost to that. And when there's a conflict between a budget and the capacity to incorporate features, even when they pay for themselves into the future, that conflict often wins on the side of can't afford it, as opposed to it will pay for itself in the future. And PACE eliminates that conflict because of that upfront financing. Second barrier is risk and fear. So basically, even if you put the money, even if you have the money and you're prepared to put it in, there's always this question, will I recover the investment when I sell? For homeowners, often the stat I've seen is that 5 years is the average time that a homeowner owns a house. And so the churn rate means that when you sell the house, that upgrade that you made, will it actually be recovered as an investment? And PACE eliminates that barrier 100%. It blows away both of those barriers. That's because the concept itself is relatively simple. PACE is financing, makes it easy for people to finance their upgrades and incorporate them right away with no money down. But it's more than just a simple concept that makes it successful. It's actually the entire ecosystem. I want to share an insight with you here, and this is at the third PACE conference that I went to. I was talking to somebody and they gave me this story, and this is basically the PACE ecosystem is like the elephant and the blind people, where people approach it from different sides, different vectors, and they think, oh, I know what this is. And they think it's this or it's that, it's a spear, it's a wall, etc. Most failures in the world, mostly in the US, and I'm going to say in Canada, for the PACE system to really flourish and deliver is when people have failed to understand the whole ecosystem itself. Now, so I've been talking about the success of the program, and I think it's important to note the success is measured not theoretically. This is the actual measures here. So you can see here from this graph that already over $6 billion has been used to finance single-family home upgrades alone, over 280,000 homes financed in the US. And that's only in 3 states. So far, PACE only exists, our PACE, residential PACE, only exists in 3 states. And this next slide illustrates why the simplicity of this is. You can see the flow chart here. The property owner signs a contract with the PACE program. energy upgrades are made. The funding is provided through the third-party administrator, and then you repay through your taxes. Residential PACE financing is simple, kind of like Amazon. If you want to buy something, you open your app, you go on to the website, you pick what you want, you say pay, and that's it. It's delivered, and you're done. This list of notes here, I'm not going to refer to right now. You can look at them later, but it basically explains sort of a little bit about the front end here. The important thing is that for residential PACE, it's simple for the user, but the investment in the back end is significant in terms of all the work that's got to be done to deliver that ease of approach and simplicity. Commercial PACE, on the other hand, is very different. So while commercial PACE is currently in the US substantially smaller in terms of scope, you can see here it's just a little over $2 billion. It is growing very quickly. It's already in 37 states. But you'll see here the representation for commercial PACE is a kitten, and that's because it's a lot easier to interface with in terms of the client. You don't have to put consumer protection measures in place and so on and so forth. And the complexity of it is actually, the burden of that complexity is on the client. You can see here there's a flow chart where the applicant has to do quite a bit of work. And in fact, I'm going to back up for a second. Residential PACE approvals in the US used to only take about 15 minutes, and they were done over the phone. Commercial PACE applications will take typically 2 to 6 months, because the contractor or the owner has to do a lot of work up front to qualify, to get all of the documents in place to qualify for PACE. And so for CPACE, it's more akin to buying from IKEA. There's a lot of things the owner has to do in order to finally get that car on the road or get their PACE financing approved here. And again, there's a list of the things that need to be done. And here's just an example of some of the perks that exist in terms of CPACE financing. And again, I'm just going to skip past this and look at the next slide here. So the question that often comes up, why was PACE so successful? Part of it is because it was the right thing at the right time. So we've been building up a demand for addressing climate change with all of the promotion, carbon tax, awareness about the climate crisis. We have motivated building owners. We have investors that are looking for secure investments. We have ready and willing contractors and consultants, and we have municipalities who want to advance the green agenda, if you will. But the one piece that was missing was the ability to link all of those together in a way that made it all turn smoothly, and PACE is exactly that. When the ecosystem is healthy, the program looks like this. When the ecosystem is poorly built, it looks more like this. And you can see here that, you know, it's a lot slower, and sometimes it doesn't even get out of the starting block. And the reason for that is this. And Alberta is a perfect example. My associates and myself, I'm currently in BC, but I was in Alberta until about a year ago, worked for years to raise awareness about PACE in the Alberta government, but they didn't quite fully understand what the ecosystem needed to look like. And as a result, they adopted legislation which ignored the recommendations that we made to them. And when that legislation was passed, it came into law in 2019, January 2019. It's now been over 2 years. Not one penny has flowed out the door yet as a result of that. So I'm going to segue now into what makes the ecosystem successful. First and foremost, and probably I'm going to say maybe the most important piece in this equation, is that there has to be an unlimited amount of capital. And there's a way that that's being achieved here. And that is because the way that PACE financing is structured in the US, and I believe they're doing the same in Europe, is that they are putting the loans out in such a way that they can bundle all the loans together and then sell that bundle in a form of securitization to the global money market. And that capital investment, that global capital, then puts the money back into the genes of the lenders, who can then churn the money back out again. The importance of infinite capital or unlimited capital here cannot be understated. The next thing is that it's got to be kept simple. The administration itself can't be pushed onto the government without resulting in typically some slowdowns, some bureaucratic measures that just impede the forward progress of it. And so in the most successful applications, PACE is administered not by a city or a municipality or a government agency, but by a third-party administrator, sometimes not for profit, sometimes for profit. And so that risk of administration and burden of administration is offloaded. The municipality really only has to do one thing, and that's file, just a couple of things, sorry. The first thing is they file a tax lien, which provides the security to the lender. And then the second thing is once the work is done and all of the, and the owner signs off on it, then all the municipality has to do is collect the taxes and then hand the portion of the taxes that are the PACE repayments back to the third-party administrator, who then takes that and passes it on to the investors. Now, the next slide I'm going to show you here is a quote from Cisco de Vries. And Cisco de Vries is actually the father or the godfather of PACE. It was his brainchild that started this back in Berkeley, California in 2008. And at a conference a couple of years ago, he said this, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but essentially he said there are only a few ways to structure a PACE ecosystem successfully, and a multitude of ways to encumber it to the point of failure. And there's plenty of evidence of that in the US. There was a case of one state that adopted PACE legislation, and after a few years, there was a zero PACE activity. And they finally turned to the PACE ecosystem and said, what's wrong? And they said, well, your statutes are poorly written and we're not prepared to invest in your state. They said, okay, what do we need to do? They rewrote the statutes, passed new statutes, and within months, money was flowing into the state, into PACE projects. I hate to say it, but I think that the problem for Canada is that we were actually a little too progressive. We started out of the gate way ahead of the US in some respects in terms of sustainability, but I think our viewpoint has become, if it has to do with sustainability, then it has to be administered by the government. And I don't want to diss the Toronto Help Program, but this is a good example of, like, in that time frame of 2014 to 2019, the US PACE system or ecosystem funded over nearly 200,000 projects to the tune of $5.4 billion. And the Toronto Help Program funded 202 projects. And it's not a question of scale here. There's generally a 10-to-1 relationship here. So you can see that there's definitely a difference in terms of the way PACE is impinging and achieving success. So here's some quick key takeaways. And you know what, I'm just going to move past this quickly here because I'm feeling like we're getting close to the end, but I'm just going to say very quickly, it's important that the legislation follows best practice from the US and not from Canada. Canada has yet to have some good demonstration of good legislation. Private capital players must be interested in playing. The ecosystem must cleave to best practice characteristics, and there's a link here to the CHBA website, the Canadian Home Building Association, which actually is a document that I wrote a few years ago. And we worked with the CHBA to put this up as a document that captures the essence of what makes for a good PACE ecosystem. You can also go to the PACE Canada website to see the vision statement, which is encapsulating what the program should look like. And finally, I really want to stress how important it is to bring experienced consultants from the US to help set it up. Now, in closing, I just want to say PACE wins because it's a win-win-win formula. It solves problems, it creates jobs in this time of COVID-19 stress. It would help inject a significant amount of capital into the economy, and it's not public dollars, it's not tax dollars, it's not dollars that we have to worry about repaying in the future. It is new money that would be invested to both create jobs and address the whole climate change issue. As you can see again from here, there is zero tax implication for the public. PACE is 100% financing and completely repaid by the borrower. And finally, in a lot of cases, well, practically universally in the case of commercial PACE, and many times in the case of residential PACE, PACE saves the owner money. the implementation of the measures result in savings which can often exceed the servicing costs of the repayment of the loan. So I want to thank you all very much. Here's some information, and I've put some links in here to some pretty important websites that you can go to reference on your own. And again, you're going to be able to get this document from the organizers, and you'll be able to reference this again on your own. And that's it.